In the quiet town of Redwood Hollow, autumn had painted the trees in fire and gold. To the neighbors, it was just another peaceful morning. But for 6-year-old Lila Bennett, everything changed when she followed a squirrel through the leaves. What began as a child's playful chase turned into a discovery that would shake the entire town. From the shadows of the forest came a whimper, not of a wild creature, but of something desperate, something broken. And when Lila bent down, she found a German shepherd puppy tangled in barbed wire, bleeding and trembling. With her bare hands, she tore the cruel metal away, whispering words of comfort no one had ever taught her. But what she didn't know was that she was being watched. From the window of a farmhouse, an old woman froze. And from the tree line, 5 massive figures stirred. This wasn't just a child rescuing a puppy. This was the beginning of a story about loyalty, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between humans and the dogs who never forget. The late afternoon sun slanted across Redwood Hollow, painting the cobblestone streets and scattered farmhouses in honey-colored light. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and fallen leaves, the sort of scent that belonged to small American towns where time seemed to move more slowly, where neighbors still waved from porches and children roamed free in the fields until supper. 6-year-old Lila Bennett darted across the backyard behind her mother's modest rented house, her small shoes crunching through piles of leaves. A squirrel, plump from weeks of gathering acorns, had caught her eye. With a squeal of delight, she took off after it, pigtails bouncing, her laughter carrying across the crisp autumn air. The squirrel leapt over a mossy log, flicking its bushy tail as if mocking her. Lila giggled harder, determined to keep pace. Her breath puffed in tiny clouds, cheeks flushed from the chill, but her little legs never faltered. To her, the world was a playground, and even the fading light of October couldn't dim the thrill of the chase. Yet beyond the fences and the quiet fields stretched the Cascade National Forest, a vast wilderness of Douglas firs and shadowed hollows. The forest was both a comfort and a mystery. Town lore spoke of hunters, of wartime exercises once held deep in its timberline, of things best left undisturbed. But to a child like Lila, it was simply a place where squirrels darted and adventure lived. The squirrel paused at the break in the fence, slipped through a gap between 2 warped boards, and disappeared into the undergrowth. Without hesitation, Lila followed, her small hand brushing the rough wood as she squeezed through. The ground changed beneath her sneakers. Leaves gave way to damp earth, twigs cracked underfoot, and the air grew cooler, denser. For a moment, she forgot the squirrel entirely. Something in the silence made her stop. The forest had gone still, too still. No rustle of birds, no scamper of chipmunks, not even the distant murmur of wind through the firs. Lila tilted her head, wide blue eyes blinking as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. And then she heard it, a sound so faint that she almost thought she imagined it. A whimper. She froze mid-step. It wasn't the chitter of the squirrel, not the bark of a fox. It was softer, thinner, the sound of something in pain. Her heart thudded faster, but it wasn't fear that gripped her. It was something else, something deeper. The instinct of a child who couldn't walk past, hurt, without wanting to help. "Hello?" she whispered into the trees, her voice trembling but kind. The whimper came again, just to her right, near the tree line where the last shafts of sun melted into shadow. Lila's breath caught. She clutched the straps of her little denim overalls, staring into the gloom. She knew her mother didn't like her wandering too far. She knew Dorothy Henderson, the elderly neighbor who sometimes watched her, had warned her about the forest, about hunters and hidden dangers. But the sound wasn't scary. It was lonely, desperate, One step, then another. Her sneakers pressed into damp moss, leaving tiny prints. Each crack of twigs beneath her feet sounded far louder than it should have. The world seemed to close in around her, the golden glow of Redwood Hollow fading into a hushed grey. The whimper grew louder. It carried a weight that tugged at her chest, a plea that bypassed fear, and went straight to the part of her that noticed when robins cocked their heads before finding worms, or when stray cats lingered by her lunchbox. That part of her that, even at 6, carried an old soul's tenderness. "Don't be scared," she murmured to the unseen creature. Her voice the same tone her mother used when storms rattled the windows at night. Somewhere, deep among the brambles, something shifted. Her pulse raced. She bit her lip, glancing back at the gap in the fence, the safe glow of town beyond. For a heartbeat, she considered turning back, running to Dorothy, telling her what she'd heard. But then the sound came again, sharper this time, broken by a tremor of pain. Lila's small fists clenched with determination. The squirrel was long forgotten. This was more important. The leaves crunched under her knees as she crouched low, peering between the thick brush. Her eyes scanned the shadows, adjusting to the dim. At first she saw nothing. Only tangled branches, dead leaves, and the skeletal remains of some forgotten hunter's trap rusting in the dirt. Then, movement, a flash of black and tan fur, a pair of eyes, wide and glassy with fear. Lila gasped softly. Her heart squeezed tight in her chest. It was a puppy, not just any puppy, a German shepherd, no more than 3 months old, its hind leg twisted in the cruel embrace of barbed wire. The metal bit deep into flesh, the fur matted with blood. Each time the pup tried to move, it whimpered in agony, the sound so heartbreakingly human that tears pricked at Lila's eyes. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a cry. For a moment, her young mind couldn't understand how anyone could leave such a trap in the woods. The cruelty of it pressed against her chest like a stone. "Hold on," she whispered, crawling closer, voice breaking though she tried to be brave. "I'll help you. I promise." The pup whimpered again, shivering, but didn't lash out. It looked at her, not with wildness, but with something deeper, a plea, a fragile thread of trust. And Lila, with all the certainty of a heart too pure to question, reached forward. Behind her, in the farmhouse window that faced the tree line, Margaret Hayes set her coffee mug down. She had been watching the girl dart after a squirrel, smiling at the child's wild energy. But now, her breath caught. The old soldier in her recognized that sound, that posture, that breed. Her hands trembled as she pressed closer to the glass. "Dear God," she whispered, her voice swallowed by the silence of Redwood Hollow. Something old was stirring, something that had been sleeping in the woods far too long. The little German shepherd pup whimpered again, the sound threading through the trees like a cry too small for the vastness of the forest. Lila knelt in the damp leaves, her knees soaking through, eyes wide and glistening. The pup's hind leg was mangled in a cruel tangle of rusted barbed wire. Whoever had left it there hadn't cared what, or who, might stumble into it. The sharp coils bit so deep into tender flesh that patches of fur had turned crimson, sticky with dried blood. Every tiny movement made the barbs sink further, tearing muscle, reopening cuts that refused to clot. Lila's throat tightened. She had never seen so much blood, not even when she scraped her knee on the gravel last summer. Her chest ached with the helplessness of it. "Oh no, baby," she whispered, her voice cracking like glass. The pup's eyes, dark, liquid brown, lifted to meet hers. They weren't wild like the raccoons that sometimes stole food from the trash. They were pleading, full of terror, exhaustion, and a flicker of something more fragile: trust. Lila wiped at her cheek with the back of her hand, realizing she was already crying. At 6 years old, she didn't have the words for the injustice of it, but she felt it in her bones. Some grown-up had made this trap, left it here, and now this little one was paying the price. She leaned forward, moving slowly, the way Dorothy had once told her to, when she spotted an injured bird in the yard. Stay calm, move soft. Let them know you're a friend. Her small fingers trembled as she reached for the first coil of barbed wire. The metal was jagged, cold even in the lingering warmth of autumn. It bit into her skin immediately. She hissed, but didn't pull away. The puppy whined in response, body quivering as if bracing for more pain. No, shh, it's okay, Lila soothed, her voice dropping into a lullaby. I'm going to help you. I promise. She tugged gently, prying the first loop of wire loose from the pup's leg. It scraped against raw skin, and the animal yelped, a high, pained cry that made Lila's stomach lurch. She froze, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered desperately. I didn't mean to hurt you. The pup blinked at her, chest rising in shallow pants, and then, astonishingly, its tail gave a weak, tiny wag, as if forgiving her, as if saying, keep going. Lila's breath hitched, but she pressed on. She slid her little sweater off, her favorite yellow one with elbow patches already frayed at the cuffs, and folded it on the ground. She would need it soon. Her bare arms prickled in the cool air, but she didn't care. One by one, she worked at the loops of wire, her small fingers getting cut and scraped. Blood welled in thin lines across her palms, stinging, but she ignored it. All that mattered was freeing him. You're so brave, she murmured, as much to herself as to the pup. Just a little more. Don't give up. The trap resisted, as though it wanted to hold its victim forever. But determination burned brighter than fear. Lila pulled, twisted, unwrapped. Each coil came away with a faint metallic screech, releasing the leg inch by inch. The smell of rust and iron filled her nose, mingling with the damp scent of earth. Finally, with a snap, the last barb fell free. The pup collapsed sideways with a soft whine, too weak to stand. Its leg was raw and bloody, fur clumped with dirt. Lila's heart cracked wide open. She grabbed her sweater and gently wrapped it around the injured limb, her hands clumsy but full of urgency. She tied the sleeves in a knot, the way she had once tied ribbons around her dolls. The pup whimpered at the pressure, but then stilled. Its eyes fluttered half shut, body trembling less violently now. You'll be okay, Lila whispered, stroking the soft fur at his neck with her tiny, blood-streaked hand. I've got you. You don't have to be scared anymore. Her own cut stung fiercely, but she didn't notice. What she noticed was the warmth of the puppy's body against her lap, the faint thud of its heartbeat under her palm. Alive, still fighting. She pulled her water bottle from her little backpack, the one her mom had filled that morning before school. Unscrewing the cap, she tipped it carefully, letting droplets fall onto the pup's dry tongue. He lapped weakly, eyes softening with each sip. That's it. Good boy, she encouraged, smiling through her tears. See? You're safe now. We're friends. The forest seemed to breathe again, leaves rustling faintly overhead. But the silence still carried weight, like the woods themselves were watching. From the farmhouse window, Margaret Hayes gripped the sill so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had seen enough to know. The way the pup held himself despite injury, the faint tan line on his neck where a training collar had once been. This wasn't a stray. Her chest tightened, a flood of old memories crashing through her. Rows of kennels, barking, echoing like thunder, the scent of gun oil and dog fur. Names she had whispered to brave shepherds before they boarded planes. Names she had later read on casualty reports. Margaret's breath shuddered. Her heart told her something dangerous had woken in the woods of Redwood Hollow, and a child's compassion had just lit the fuse. Meanwhile, Lila gathered the pup gently in her arms, sweater-wrapped leg pressed to her chest. The animal was heavier than she expected, its body limp with exhaustion, but she didn't care. She tucked her chin against his fur and whispered, "I won't leave you. Not ever." The words carried no hesitation. For Lila, promises were sacred. And somewhere deep in the forest, carried on a wind that suddenly stilled, another sound answered. Faint, distant, and chilling. The low, mournful howl of something far larger. Margaret Hayes stood at the window of her weathered farmhouse, the steam from her coffee mug curling upward and vanishing into the dimming light. Her joints ached, as they always did in the colder months. But that wasn't what made her grip the sill, until her knuckles turned pale. It was the sight unfolding at the edge of her property. Through the glass, streaked with October drizzle, she saw little Lila Bennett, all pigtails and scraped knees, kneeling in the dirt beyond the old fence line, cradling something against her chest. Even from this distance, Margaret could see the streaks of crimson staining the girl's hands. A puppy, not just any puppy, a German shepherd. The recognition struck her like a blow. Her breath hitched, a sound that escaped her lips before she could stop it. The coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor, dark liquid spreading like spilled blood. "No," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "Not here. Not again." Margaret had lived in Redwood Hollow for 30 years. She knew the patterns of the seasons, the way the deer moved through the timberline, the song of owls after dusk. But this was something outside the rhythm of the town, something that smelled of old wars and unfinished business. Her mind snapped backward through time with brutal clarity. She saw kennels lined with straw, the restless pacing of eager young shepherds waiting for orders. She remembered the echo of boots on concrete, the clipped voices of handlers, the metallic tang of weapon oil in the air, and always, the eyes. Amber eyes filled with loyalty and fire, eyes that followed her every command during training. Dogs that would leap through smoke and shrapnel without hesitation, because their purpose was not their own. She remembered their names. She always remembered the names. Rex, Valor, Ghost. Shepherds that never returned from overseas deployments. Soldiers on 4 legs, buried in sand, thousands of miles from home. Margaret's chest tightened, an old grief pressing against her ribs. She had trained them, prepared them for war, and yet she had never quite forgiven herself for sending them away, for not being there when their loyalty cost them everything. Now, staring at the trembling form in Lila's arms, she saw more than just an injured pup. She saw posture, bearing. Even in its weakness, the pup carried itself differently, as if bred not for backyards or firehouse mascots, but for service, a working dog, military lines. Her pulse quickened. She could see the faint outline of fur rubbed bare where a collar had once sat, not the cheap nylon kind from a pet store, but the thick strap used for tactical training. This puppy had been born into a destiny, one that humans had decided long before it could open its eyes. "Dear God," she murmured again, But this time it wasn't just shock, it was dread. Lila, innocent as spring water, bent low and whispered into the puppy's ear. Margaret couldn't hear the words, but she could read the child's intent in the softness of her movements, in the way her small hand shielded the animal's fragile body. Compassion, courage, a promise no child should have to make. The image sliced Margaret open in two directions at once: hope and fear. Hope, because she saw in Lila the kind of heart that the world desperately needed, the kind that saw pain and instinctively reached out. Fear, because she knew what kind of shadow would inevitably follow. Shepherds like these did not appear in quiet Oregon towns, without a story written in scars and silence. Margaret pressed her palm flat against the glass, as though she could will the girl back to safety. The air in the farmhouse grew heavy. It smelled faintly of coffee grounds and apple pie cooling on the counter. But beneath it, Margaret swore she could smell something older, something carried on the wind from the tree line. Gunpowder, sweat, iron. Her late husband Harold used to tell her she had the senses of a hound, the way she picked up things others overlooked. She wished he were here now, his broad hand steadying hers, his laugh cutting through the ghosts. But Harold was 5 years gone, and the house felt emptier than ever. And yet, she wasn't alone. Not really, because deep in the forest, something stirred. Margaret's gaze darted past the girl and the puppy into the dark spaces between the firs. For an instant, she thought she saw movement, a shape. The flicker of fur sliding silently between trees. Her heart skipped. She knew that feeling. The tightening of air before a patrol ambush. The way silence pressed like a warning before the first shot rang out. The back of her neck prickled. She had trained enough shepherds to know their patterns. If a pup was here, trapped, abandoned, bleeding, then others were near. Dogs never left their own, not willingly. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, the weight of recognition pressing down. She could feel the years between now and then collapsing, her life in the military kennel bleeding into this quiet October afternoon. Something old was coming back. When she opened her eyes again, Lila was lifting the puppy higher, whispering fiercely, as though vowing her protection. The girl's blonde hair caught the dying sun, a halo around her determined face. Innocence wrapped around tragedy. Light, cradling a secret born of war. Margaret's lips moved in a prayer she hadn't spoken in years. Lord, protect her. Because deep in her bones, she knew the truth. This wasn't just about a child and a wounded pup. It was the beginning of something larger, a story written long before Lila was born, one that carried the scent of battlefields and blood-soaked loyalty. And as twilight settled over Redwood Hollow, Margaret Hayes shivered in her farmhouse kitchen, shards of porcelain at her feet, coffee cooling across the floorboards. A chill ran down her spine, colder than any October wind. Something was returning, something that had waited in the shadows, biding its time, and it was about to step back into her life. The screen door banged against its frame as Margaret Hayes pushed it open with more force than her body usually allowed. Her knees protested, her lungs burned from the sudden rush, but fear drove her faster than pain. She hadn't moved this quickly in years. "Lila Bennett," she called, her voice sharp, carrying across the yard. "Child, you come back here this instant." Her words sliced through the autumn air, startling a crow from the fence post. The bird lifted into the gray sky with a caw that echoed like a warning. At the edge of the woods, Lila froze. She clutched the puppy tighter against her chest, sweater tied around its wounded leg, her little face flushed with determination and fear. "But Miss Margaret, he's hurt." Lila's voice wavered, thin but fierce. "I have to help him. Someone left mean wire and it cut him all up. I can't just leave him." Margaret's heart ached at the sight. The girl was only 6, yet the weight of compassion pulled her forward with the certainty of a soldier. For a moment, Margaret saw not a child, but a reflection of herself decades ago, crouching in the dust of a training yard with a trembling pup that would one day leap into fire because she asked it to. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath, then stepped closer, her boots crunching through the brittle grass. "Listen to me, honey," she said, softer now, but with a tremor beneath the calm. "That puppy isn't like the others you found. He's no stray. Look at the way he holds himself, even hurt like that. Look at those eyes. That's a working dog." Lila blinked, confused but listening. The pup whimpered, nuzzling closer against her. Margaret's throat tightened. The images came back whether she wanted them or not. She saw Harold, her late husband, the day he left for Korea, his army uniform pressed so crisp it seemed to cut the air. She remembered the kennels afterward, the endless cycle of training shepherds, teaching them to sit, stay, search, to leap through smoke-filled rooms and obey without hesitation. She remembered the handlers, young men who whispered secrets to their dogs at night, because the animals were the only ones who listened without judgment. And she remembered the reports, the folded letters with black borders, the phone calls in the middle of the night. "We regret to inform you." Names she could never forget. Dogs she had kissed on the head before they boarded planes, never to return. Margaret shook herself back into the present. She saw her reflection faintly in Lila's wide eyes, an old woman lined with grief, standing on the edge of something she prayed she'd never face again. "Lila," she said firmly, "listen to me now. That pup's family is close. They don't leave their young, not unless something's gone very wrong. And German shepherds—" Her voice faltered, then steadied. "They're loyal to the death. If they find you holding him, they won't stop to ask questions. They'll see you as a threat." The girl's lips trembled, but she shook her head stubbornly. "He's just a baby. They'll know I'm helping." Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of memory pressing against her. How many times had she told soldiers the same thing? The dogs know. They always know. They'll protect you, if you protect them. But this was different. These weren't the controlled kennels of Fort Benning or Lackland Air Force Base. This was the wild forest, and the scars on that pup told a story no 6-year-old could possibly understand. Margaret took another step, lowering her voice as if coaxing both girl and dog. "I trained dogs like him for 30 years, Lila. Police, military, animals bred to face things no living creature should face. I know their language, their signals. And I can tell you this. If he's here, bleeding in a trap, then something dangerous is moving in these woods, something we don't want to wake." Lila hugged the puppy tighter, her chin trembling as she looked down at its glazed eyes. For the first time, doubt flickered in her. But what if no one else helps him?" she whispered. "What if he dies because I walked away?" The question pierced Margaret's chest like a blade. It was the same question that had haunted her for decades. What if I hadn't sent them? What if I'd fought harder to bring them home? Her breath caught, and her voice softened to a breaking point. "That's the curse of caring, sweetheart. It hurts either way. But I promise you this. You won't be alone in carrying it. Not while I'm still breathing." Lila looked up at her, eyes wide and wet. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy with all the unspoken things. Margaret's ghosts, the child's innocence, the bloodied weight of the pup. Then the woods answered. A long, low howl rolled through the trees, so deep it seemed to rattle the earth beneath their feet. It wasn't wild, not the scattered call of coyotes. It was measured, coordinated, a signal. Margaret's blood ran cold. She knew that sound. She had heard it once in a desert half a world away, when a squad of shepherds announced they had found the enemy. It was the call of trained soldiers, not strays. Her hand shook as she reached out toward Lila. "We need to go. Now." But the girl stood rooted to the spot, clutching the pup, as if letting go would mean betraying him. And behind them, the forest grew still again, waiting. Margaret glanced toward the darkening tree line, her old heart thudding against brittle ribs. She had thought her days of standing between innocence and war were long past. She had thought the ghosts of canine kennels and battlefield reports had been buried with Harold. But here, in Redwood Hollow, on an ordinary October afternoon, those ghosts had returned. With amber eyes and voices that howled like soldiers calling roll. Margaret swallowed hard, forcing the fear down into her bones. Her voice came out hoarse but unyielding. "Lila Bennett, child of mercy, you listen to me. You are brave, braver than most adults I've ever known. But bravery doesn't mean standing still when the storm comes. Bravery means knowing when to run." She stepped closer, extending her hand, her eyes never leaving the shifting shadows beyond the trees. "Give me the pup. Let me face what's coming. You don't know these dogs, but I do." The child hesitated, torn between instinct and trust. The pup whimpered once more, a small sound swallowed by the silence pressing in. And somewhere in that silence, Margaret felt it, the turning of the world. A moment where past and present collided, where a widow's grief met a child's compassion. Something old was stirring. Something she had prayed she'd never see again, and it was coming for them. The howl faded, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed against the lungs like stone. Even the crows that had been circling moments ago seemed to have vanished, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Lila clutched the puppy tighter, his whimpers muffled against her chest. She could feel the weak flutter of his heart, each beat hammering into her own ribs as though their pulses were tangled together. Her small frame shook, but she refused to let go. Beside her, Margaret Hayes straightened as much as her old spine would allow. Her breathing came fast and shallow, but her eyes, sharp, trained, unyielding, swept the tree line with the precision of a soldier scanning for ambush. She knew this silence. She had lived long enough to recognize the heartbeat before impact, the breath before the wolves broke cover. "Stay behind me, Lila," she whispered, voice taut as wire. The girl's lip trembled. "What's happening?" Margaret didn't answer. She couldn't, because the truth was arriving even as the words caught in her throat. From the shadows between the Douglas firs, shapes began to emerge, not with the wild, erratic movement of predators, but with deliberate, controlled precision. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 massive German shepherds stepped into the clearing, their paws silent on the damp earth. Their coats caught the faint light, streaks of black and tan marred by scars, patches of fur roughened by battles long past. Each one was heavier, larger than any household pet, their bodies honed for work, for survival. Lila gasped. They're huge." Margaret said nothing. Her throat had gone dry. She wasn't looking at dogs. She was looking at soldiers. The 5 fanned out in a loose semicircle, their bodies forming a living wall that sealed off retreat. The child and the old woman stood at the center of their quiet choreography. Every shepherd's amber eyes locked on them, unreadable, unwavering. The air shifted. Suspense thickened until even the trees seemed to lean closer. The largest, a grizzled male with a limp in his rear leg, padded to the left flank. A younger pair, broad-shouldered males whose ears swiveled like radar dishes, mirrored each other at the edges. A scarred female, her gaze flicking constantly to the tree line, took the rear. And then there was the leader. At the center of the formation, stepping forward with a regal bearing that silenced even the wind, came the alpha female. Her muzzle was lined with old scars, pale ridges across dark fur, souvenirs of battles fought in silence. A jagged mark ran from her left ear down to her jaw, but it didn't diminish her strength. If anything, it crowned her. She moved with the grace of a commander who knew her place in the world was earned, not given. Lila buried her face against the pup, her small voice barely audible. "Are they hunters?" Margaret's jaw tightened. She couldn't lie. She didn't know. The pack didn't lunge. They didn't snarl or bristle as wild animals would. Their ears weren't pinned back. Their tails didn't lash. Instead, they spread evenly, maintaining lines of sight, their bodies angled as though trained to hold perimeter. It was formation, military formation. Margaret's heart hammered. Memories of desert compounds, of patrol drills, of shepherds weaving like shadows at their handlers' sides came rushing back. She could almost hear the barked orders of sergeants, the sound of boots on sand. But here, there were no handlers, only the dogs. The alpha stopped 3 paces from Margaret and Lila. Her head lowered, muscles taut. Her eyes, amber, steady, intelligent, studied them with unnerving intensity. Not the hunger of a predator, not the mindless suspicion of a feral stray. No. This was something else, something Margaret had seen only a handful of times in her life. Assessment. They were being read, measured, judged. The pup in Lila's arms whimpered, a weak cry that broke through the tension like a spark. Instantly, the alpha's ears flicked forward. Her muscles shifted, her eyes leaving Margaret to lock on the bundle clutched against the child's chest. The change in the pack was immediate. The grizzled male limped closer, his body angled to shield the alpha. The 2 younger males tightened the circle, moving in unison, as though choreographed. The scarred female glanced back into the woods once more, before refocusing on the humans, as if making certain no other threat encroached. Margaret raised a trembling hand. "Easy, girl," she whispered instinctively, slipping into the tone she hadn't used since training kennels decades ago. Calm, steady, commanding respect, but never cruelty. "We're not here to hurt him." "The child freed your pup from the wire." Her words vanished into the stillness. The only sound was Lila's shaky breathing and the faint drip of blood from the puppy's bandaged leg onto the leaves. For an endless moment, no one moved. Then the alpha did something that made Margaret's breath catch. She tilted her head, just slightly, but with unmistakable curiosity. The faintest whine rumbled from her throat. Not threat, not warning, but something closer to acknowledgement. Lila peeked up from the crook of her arm, blue eyes shining with tears. She whispered, more to the puppy than anyone else. "They're not angry. I think they know." Margaret's pulse pounded in her ears. Her instincts screamed danger, but her experience whispered something else. This wasn't a random encounter. Packs didn't move like this unless bound by training, and trained dogs didn't hesitate unless they were torn between orders and instinct. But whose orders? And why here, in Redwood Hollow? The alpha's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. She lowered her head further, the scars on her muzzle catching the dim light. One step forward, another. The ground barely whispered under her paws. Margaret tensed, ready to shield the girl with the last strength her aging body could muster. But instead of striking, the alpha paused within arm's reach. Her massive head dipped closer to Lila. The child's breath caught, her small body frozen in awe and fear. The alpha exhaled, warm breath stirring the child's hair. Then, slowly, deliberately, she extended her tongue and licked the dirt-streaked skin of Lila's forehead. The touch was gentle, maternal. Lila's eyes widened, a tiny smile broke through her tears. "She's thanking me," she whispered. Margaret's knees nearly gave way. For the first time in years, a chill she could not name ran the length of her spine. She knew what she was witnessing, not the instincts of beasts, not even the loyalty of trained dogs. This was ritual, anointing, acceptance, and it terrified her. Because if the pack had chosen the child, if they had claimed her in whatever ancient or trained code they followed, then everything in Redwood Hollow was about to change. The forest remained hushed, the shadows deepening around them. The circle held, disciplined, unwavering. Hunters or guardians? Margaret couldn't yet decide. But one thing was certain. They had not come here by chance. The clearing was so silent, it felt suspended in glass. Even the trees seemed to bend inward, their branches holding their breath, as if nature itself was bearing witness to something it hadn't seen before. Lila Bennett clutched the wounded puppy tighter against her chest, though his trembling had begun to ease in the circle of her small arms. She could feel his shallow breaths against her ribs, warm and fragile. Her own heartbeat fluttered fast and unsteady, but when her gaze lifted to the scarred giant before her, fear softened into something else. Wonder. The alpha female stepped closer. Her coat was dark sable, streaked with grey along the muzzle, and the pale scar that ran from her left ear down across her jaw told stories of battles neither child nor grandmother could imagine. One eye was slightly clouded, yet it burned with a fierce intelligence that pinned Margaret and Lila where they stood. Her presence wasn't wild chaos. It was command. Margaret's pulse thundered in her temples. She had trained dogs like this, had seen the way hardened canines moved in formation, had stood in parade grounds watching creatures of fur and fang behave like soldiers under invisible orders. And yet nothing in her decades of service had prepared her for this. For a pack leader moving without leash or handler, yet with perfect discipline, toward a defenseless child. Her instincts screamed. Step forward, shield the girl, intercept before teeth could strike. But her body, heavy with age and memory, wouldn't move. Her breath caught as the alpha closed the last gap of air between them. Lila tilted her chin up. The pup whimpered weakly in her arms, but the girl whispered to him, her voice small but steady. "It's okay. She's not mad. She just wants to see you." The alpha lowered her great head until her scarred muzzle hovered inches from the child's face. Warm breath puffed across Lila's skin, carrying the smell of earth, musk and iron. For an eternal second, the world seemed balanced on a knife edge, and then the impossible happened. The alpha's tongue brushed across Lila's forehead in a slow, deliberate lick. Lila gasped softly, eyes wide, but the fear melted almost instantly into a smile, trembling at the corners of her lips. She thanked me, she whispered, as if afraid the magic would shatter if she spoke too loud. She knows I helped her baby. Margaret's knees nearly buckled. Her hand gripped the nearest fence post to steady herself. In all her years, all the drills, the deployments, the tearful goodbyes to dogs bound for war zones, she had never seen anything like it. Acceptance from an alpha, directed not toward another dog, not toward a fellow soldier, but toward a child. Her mind reeled. She remembered men in uniforms whispering that certain dogs could sense destiny, that they carried instincts closer to prophecy than obedience. Old handlers used to joke about it after long shifts. Some dogs just know. They choose their people. But it was never more than superstition. Until now. Margaret's lips parted, her voice trembling into the silence. Lord help us. She's anointing her. The word escaped before she could stop it, and it chilled her to her marrow, because that was what it looked like. Not aggression, not mere acknowledgement, but an anointing. A scarred warrior bestowing recognition on a child. The other 4 shepherds shifted subtly in response. The grizzled male's ears pricked forward, his amber eyes softening. The 2 young sentries lowered their stance, tails flicking once in unison. Even the scarred female at the rear relaxed her constant scanning, bowing her head for the first time since they'd appeared. The pack had received their alpha's verdict. The girl was no enemy, she was pack. Lila reached out a tentative hand, her fingers brushing against the alpha's coarse fur. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into the touch, her scarred face pressing against the child's small palm. A laugh bubbled up from Lila's throat, fragile but luminous. See, Miss Margaret, she's not scary. She knows we're friends. Margaret swallowed hard, torn between awe and dread. She couldn't deny what she was seeing. The child wasn't wrong. But beneath the miracle, her old trainer's mind screamed questions. Why here? Why now? Why this girl? She studied the alpha more closely, forcing herself to see through the haze of emotion. The scars weren't random. They told the story of explosives, shrapnel, gunfire. The set of her shoulders, the discipline in her stance. This wasn't a feral pack leader cobbled together by chance. This was a veteran, a survivor of human wars, and she was choosing. Margaret's heart ached with memory. She remembered placing leashes into the hands of soldiers barely out of their teens, watching their eyes light up with trust as they bonded with dogs destined to save their lives. She remembered Harold's letters from overseas, how he'd described the shepherds as the only soldiers who never break. And she remembered burying Harold in the churchyard, her hand pressed to the folded flag, wondering if she'd lost the last of her purpose. But now, staring at Lila's dirt-streaked face, beneath the alpha's gentle touch, Margaret felt something stir inside her chest. Something she thought had been buried with him. The old war dogs were back, and they had chosen a new generation to guard. The alpha drew back slightly, her eyes lingering on Lila for a long, unnerving moment. It was not the gaze of an animal. It was the gaze of a commander, weighing the worth of an ally. Finally, she gave a low rumble. Not growl, not warning, but a sound that carried the weight of recognition. The forest seemed to release its breath with it. Lila smiled through her tears. She held the injured pup closer and whispered to the alpha as if sharing a secret. "I'll keep him safe. I promise." Margaret closed her eyes briefly. She had no words for the destiny being woven here, only the heavy certainty that the world had just shifted. The scarred alpha had done more than thank a child. She had passed a torch, and Margaret Hayes, widow, trainer, survivor, felt the chill run down her spine. Because when warriors bow their heads to innocence, it is never by accident. It is the beginning of something far greater. The clearing held its silence, yet it no longer felt empty. It pulsed with presence. 5 German shepherds standing guard, the child in their center, and an old woman who suddenly felt the weight of her past pressing down on her lungs. Margaret Hayes steadied herself, fingers curled against the rough grain of the fence post, but her eyes never left the pack. She knew what she was seeing, though part of her wanted to deny it. Denial would have been easier, safer, but truth had a shape. It was standing right in front of her. Her gaze swept across them one by one. The grizzled male, larger than the rest, favored his right rear leg. His gait carried the faint hitch of old wounds. Margaret had seen it before. The uneven rhythm of dogs who'd taken shrapnel or torn muscle in explosive blasts. The kind of injury that never healed cleanly, no matter how much rest or care they were given. Her eyes moved to the younger pair, lean and sharp-eyed, each one mirroring the other's position as if tethered by invisible command. Their spacing was deliberate, equidistant, covering angles, eyes constantly flicking to the tree line as though expecting an ambush. That wasn't coincidence. That was training. Soldiers on patrol didn't need to speak to know their formation. Neither did these dogs. The scarred female in the rear made Margaret's chest tighten. Across her ribs ran a latticework of pale lines, the kind that came from fire. Burns. Margaret had once overseen a shepherd pulled from a training explosion who bore the same map etched into her skin. She remembered the smell, the way the dog still tried to obey commands even as her body failed her. And here, in Redwood Hollow, stood another survivor wearing the same badge of fire. Then her eyes returned to the alpha. The scar across the alpha's muzzle glistened faintly in the fading light, pale against dark fur. It wasn't the jagged tear of an animal fight. Margaret knew those well enough. This scar was clean, surgical almost, the mark of metal or blade. Perhaps a bayonet, perhaps shrapnel slicing across her face. And yet the dog's posture carried no weakness. She stood as if her scars were not wounds, but medals. Margaret's breath trembled. Her voice broke from her throat before she could stop it. "They're not strays." Lila, crouched on the ground with the pup nestled in her arms, looked up, confusion flickering in her wide eyes. "Not strays? Then, what are they?" Margaret swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the alpha. "Veterans," she whispered. "They're survivors." The word hung in the air, heavy as stone. Images crashed through Margaret's memory. A desert sunrise in Kandahar, the deafening crack of gunfire, the thunder of paws racing across dust-choked ground. She remembered standing in a kennel years ago, listening to handlers tell stories of their dogs, how they had saved platoons by detecting mines, how they had dragged wounded men to safety under fire. She remembered the funerals, small wooden boxes draped in flags, the handlers weeping openly, because no human comrade had ever been as loyal. And she remembered one phrase, repeated often among soldiers who knew the price of survival. "The dogs don't forget." Her throat constricted as she looked at the pack. They weren't wild, weren't abandoned pets. They were ghosts that had walked out of battlefields and into her quiet Oregon town. Lila's little hands stroked the pup's fur, her voice trembling. They're like soldiers. Margaret forced herself to nod. Yes, child. That's exactly what they are. Soldiers. The kind who carry their wars in their scars. The words seemed too large for the clearing, too heavy for a 6-year-old's ears. But Lila's eyes only widened, as if something in her small heart already understood. The pack shifted again, subtly but unmistakably. The grizzled male circled a step wider, covering an opening in their perimeter. The scarred female's ears swiveled at a sound Margaret hadn't even heard yet, the faint snap of a twig deeper in the forest. Their discipline was unnerving, like watching a drill performed without orders. Margaret's chest ached with awe and dread. She had spent decades reading posture, knowing when a tail twitch meant unease, when pinned ears meant aggression, when a certain shift in stance meant readiness to strike. And everything she saw here screamed one thing: cohesion. These weren't animals who had scraped survival together by accident. They were a unit. They've been trained, Margaret whispered, almost to herself. They're still following it, even without handlers. Lila looked up, brow furrowed. But why are they here? In our woods? Margaret had no answer. Only the icy certainty crawling down her spine. Whatever had brought them here was not finished. The alpha took one more step toward Lila. The child's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't move away. Margaret's breath caught, ready to intervene. But the scarred female only lowered her head slightly. Not submission, not threat. Something else. Recognition. Margaret felt her heart falter. The dog wasn't just seeing a child. She was seeing something more, as if weighing the worth of this tiny human the way she might weigh a comrade's courage. And Margaret understood with a sinking certainty. This wasn't chance. The pack wasn't circling randomly. They weren't simply drawn by the puppy's whimpers. They were reading, assessing, remembering. Veterans, survivors, witnesses of wars long past. And now, they had stepped from memory into the life of a 6-year-old girl. Margaret's knees felt weak, but her voice, when it came, was iron. Lila, listen to me carefully. These dogs aren't here by accident. They've seen things, done things. They carry battles on their backs. And if they've chosen to stand here with us, she trailed off, unable to finish, because the truth was too big, too dangerous to speak aloud. The pup whimpered again, and the alpha's ears twitched. Her gaze softened once more, amber eyes glinting with something Margaret never thought she'd see reflected there. Not suspicion, not hunger, but kinship. The widow's breath shuddered as she pressed her hand to her chest. She felt Harold's absence keenly in that moment, as though he were standing beside her, whispering what she already knew. The past had come home, and it was wrapped in fur, scars, and loyalty that refused to die. For a few heartbeats, the clearing stood in stillness, as if even the world itself was waiting for something unseen. Lila's small hand stroked the puppy's fur, her breath uneven, while Margaret Hayes watched the pack with every nerve stretched thin. She had already recognized the discipline in their stance, the scars carved into their bodies. But what came next made her blood run colder than any memory she carried. It began with the alpha. The scarred female, Duchess, Margaret's mind named her instinctively, lifted her head to the dying light of dusk. Her ears swiveled once, her chest expanded, and then, with a sound that carried through bone as much as air, she released a howl. It wasn't the chaotic cry of wolves. It wasn't the broken song of coyotes. It was measured, controlled. 3 beats long. Pause. 2 shorter notes, rising like signals. And then the others answered. The grizzled male, voice deep and ragged like gravel dragged across stone, harmonized in a lower register. The 2 younger males followed, perfectly synchronized with each other, spacing their calls exactly as if obeying invisible command. The scarred female in the rear joined last, her voice keening higher, circling the sound and weaving it together. The forest filled with their voices, not wild, not feral, but orchestrated, a chorus bound by discipline. Lila gasped, clutching the pup tighter. "They're singing," she whispered, wonder widening her eyes. Margaret's hand rose to her mouth. Her heart pounded so loud she thought the pack might hear it. No, not singing. This wasn't a melody for the sake of beauty. She had heard this before, in deserts half a world away, when handlers taught dogs to signal across distances without radios. This was a call and response, a coded roll call. Her eyes stung. Old ghosts pressed in. She remembered standing in a kennel at twilight, listening to shepherds howl when their handlers returned from missions. The eerie organization of it, sounding like they were counting themselves alive, one by one. And here, in Redwood Hollow, she was hearing it again. "Dear God," she breathed, voice cracking. "They're not howling to the moon. They're reporting in." Lila turned to her, puzzled. "Reporting in?" Margaret swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the pack. "It's what soldiers do, sweetheart. They account for each other. One voice leads, the rest follow. It's how you know your unit's still intact, still alive." Her voice faltered as tears welled unbidden. "I trained dogs to do this. I thought I left it behind with Harold. But they—" She gestured helplessly toward the pack. "They remember." The alpha's call rose again, sharper this time, commanding. The others responded instantly, voices layering with eerie precision. The sound carried through the forest, over the farmhouse roof, into the heart of Redwood Hollow itself. Neighbors would hear it. Deer would flee. But Margaret understood. This wasn't for the forest. This was for each other. Lila pressed her cheek to the puppy's head, whispering softly, so only he could hear. "They're telling you it's okay. They're saying, we're here." Margaret's chest constricted. The innocence in the girl's voice cut like glass. She was right, in her way. The pack wasn't threatening, wasn't warning. They were declaring unity. And beneath that unity, Margaret heard something else. Loss. The way the grizzled male's howl cracked at the edges. The scarred female's voice lingering too long on the final note, as if mourning. The alpha's call strong, but weighted, carrying sorrow, like a commander rallying her troops after too many battles. These weren't just signals. These were memories spoken aloud. Margaret shivered. "They've lost someone," she whispered. "Their handler, their family. This is how they remember him." Lila's eyes shimmered, wide and wet. "Like a prayer?" Margaret nodded slowly, her throat tightening. "Yes, child. Like a prayer, only they know the words to." The sound filled the dusk, vibrating through the earth beneath their feet. Margaret felt it in her bones, like a drumbeat she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just sound. It was declaration. We are still here. We are still one. And we will not forget. Her knees trembled as realization sank deeper. "They're not lost," she whispered, half to herself, half to the ghosts listening. "They're soldiers without a war. and they've brought their war home with them. Lila didn't fully understand, but she felt it. She clung to the pup, as though her small arms could keep the world from breaking. "They sound so sad," she whispered, "like they're calling for someone who won't come back." Margaret closed her eyes briefly. She had heard it too many times before. Dogs waiting at kennels, howling at the absence of handlers who never returned. She had heard the sound echo across compounds in foreign lands, and she had promised herself she'd never hear it again. Yet here it was, in the quiet Oregon woods, pouring out of 5 scarred shepherds who should have been in homes, safe, retired. Instead, they stood like living monuments to loyalty, howling for the dead. Her hand trembled as she reached out, resting it on Lila's shoulder. "They're telling us something, sweetheart. Something important. They're saying they're still a unit, still a family, and they won't break it. Not for anyone." The alpha's howl peaked, then faded. One by one, the others lowered their voices, the chorus dwindling until only silence remained. But it was not the same silence as before. This one felt charged, sacred, like the hush after a prayer. Lila sniffled, wiping her cheek against the puppy's fur. I think they chose us to hear it." Margaret's eyes burned. She wanted to tell the child she was imagining things, but the truth was carved into every scar on those dogs' bodies, in every disciplined step they took. Lila was right. The pack had howled for themselves, but they had also howled for the humans watching. They had made them witnesses to their oath, their grief, their bond, and Margaret Hayes, widow of a soldier, trainer of countless war dogs, knew the meaning with devastating clarity. These weren't strays haunting the forest. These were veterans sounding their roll call, and they had just invited her and Lila into their circle of memory. The forest lay hushed after the haunting chorus, as though even the wind respected the sound that had passed through it. The air was heavy, saturated with something ancient, something that seemed older than wars, older than wounds. Loyalty itself, carried in the voices of 5 scarred shepherds. Lila Bennett, only 6 years old, didn't tremble anymore. Somewhere between the first cry of the alpha and the last lingering note of the pack, her fear had been replaced with a strange certainty. She sat cross-legged on the cold earth, the wounded puppy nestled against her small chest, and looked around at the looming figures that had once terrified her. Now she smiled. "They're not scary at all," she whispered, her voice just for them. "They're just sad and tired." She lowered her head to the pup's ear, as though he could carry her words back to the others. "It's okay. We'll take care of you. You don't have to cry anymore." The alpha's ears twitched. Slowly she stepped forward, her massive paws silent on the carpet of pine needles. She lowered herself into a sit directly in front of the child, posture erect but calm, amber eyes fixed on the little girl. Margaret Hayes' throat tightened at the sight. Every instinct as a canine trainer screamed that this was no ordinary encounter. What she was watching wasn't play, wasn't dominance, wasn't even curiosity. It was something more deliberate. The quiet assessment of a commander standing before a recruit. And yet Lila, in her innocence, met the gaze without flinching. She reached out a small, dirt-streaked hand and touched the dog's scarred muzzle. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she murmured softly. "I know what it feels like to miss someone." The alpha didn't move, didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth. She simply leaned forward until her forehead brushed against the girl's. The contact lasted only a heartbeat, but it reverberated through Margaret like a gunshot. It was a gesture she had seen once before, a handler pressing his forehead to his shepherd's before heading into a mission he knew he wouldn't survive. A final pact. A vow beyond words. Her knees weakened. Dear God, she thought. She's letting the child into the pack. Around them, the other shepherds shifted, but not with aggression. Their circle softened. The scarred female lay down, lowering her head to the earth in a posture of rest. The grizzled male eased closer, his limp pronounced, but his eyes gentler than before. One of the young males wagged his tail once, barely visible, but enough for Margaret's trained eye to catch. They weren't guarding against the girl anymore. They were guarding with her. Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. What language could capture this? She had spent a lifetime teaching humans how to command dogs, to bridge the gap with obedience, with signals, with whistles and hand gestures. But here, in a quiet Oregon clearing, a 6-year-old child had done something no trainer ever could. She had stepped past language and into kinship. "Do you hear them, Miss Margaret?" Lila's voice was hushed, reverent, as though afraid to break the fragile peace. Margaret blinked. "Hear them? They're talking." The girl nodded solemnly, as if it were the simplest truth. "Not with words, but I can feel it here." She placed her small palm over her heart. Margaret's chest tightened. Children sometimes said such things, whimsical, naive. But there was nothing whimsical in Lila's eyes now. They were wide, ancient somehow, as if she were carrying wisdom no 6-year-old should bear. The alpha huffed softly, a sound like an exhale of approval, then shifted her weight and lay down at last. Her massive frame curved protectively near the child, her scars visible in the dim light, her body relaxed but ready. The others mirrored her, lowering themselves one by one, until the entire pack was sprawled around Lila like a living fortress. Lila sighed, resting her cheek against the pup's fur. "See? They're not alone anymore, and neither am I." The words pierced Margaret deeper than she expected. She felt the weight of years pressing down. Harold's absence at the breakfast table, the phone calls that never came, the quiet evenings when the only company was the ticking clock. For so long, she had believed herself alone, a widow marking time. But here, in this clearing, she realized she wasn't the only one. These dogs carried the same emptiness. And somehow, impossibly, a child's compassion had bridged it. Margaret sank slowly onto the fallen log behind her old bones aching, but her eyes never left the scene. She thought of Harold again, of his steady voice when he told her once, "Animals don't lie. When they choose you, it's for life." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Lila," she whispered, voice husky. "Do you know what you've done?" The girl looked up, puzzled, her small hands stroking the pup's ears. "I just helped." Margaret closed her eyes, tears brimming. "Yes, that's all it ever takes." The forest exhaled around them. Crickets began to chirp again, and a breeze rustled the canopy above. The silence had shifted, no longer suffocating, but alive, as though the earth itself had acknowledged the pact sealed in that clearing. The alpha pressed closer, her flank brushing against the child, her eyes half closed but alert. It was a posture Margaret recognized instantly. Vigilance softened by trust. The posture of a guardian. A shiver ran through her old frame. She understood now, clearer than she wanted to. The child had been accepted. The pack had chosen her. And with that choice, nothing in Redwood Hollow would ever be the same. Margaret sat straighter, her grief and fear giving way to something sharper. She knew destiny when she saw it. She had seen men and dogs forged into unbreakable bonds before. She had seen sacrifice, loyalty, and the strange sacred thing that rose between soldier and canine. But this, a 6-year-old child woven into the fabric of battle-scarred shepherds, was something beyond even her long years of service. A silent pact had been made, and Margaret Hayes, who thought her life's battles were behind her, knew in her bones that it was only the beginning. The forest seemed to bow inward, branches knitting above like ribs of a cathedral, the silence holding its breath. Lila Bennett sat in the middle of it, clutching the wounded pup as if it were stitched to her heart. Around her, 5 scarred shepherds had formed their living circle. Duchess in front, shoulders squared, eyes like amber fire. Ranger limping but steady at her flank. Angel perched higher, scanning the tree line. Scout and Bear fanning outward like sentries. Margaret Hayes stood a few paces away, her chest tight with awe and dread. She had trained dogs for war. She had seen formations like this before. It was not instinct. It was memory. The rumble came then, low, mechanical, wrong against the hush of the woods. Tires jolting over roots, an engine's guttural growl. Every shepherd's ears flicked in unison. Angel froze mid-prowl, muscles tensing. Duchess rose, her scar catching the last slant of dying sunlight, and turned toward the sound. Margaret's stomach dropped. Engines in these woods meant one thing: the Forest Service. Through the trees, a government-issued pickup crawled into the clearing. Its headlights sliced beams through underbrush, scattering shadows like fleeing animals. The truck stopped 30 yards out, idling with a menacing hum. For a beat, the forest went so still, Margaret swore she could hear her own pulse. The door creaked open. Marcus Webb stepped down. His uniform looked crisp, but his eyes were sunken hollows, rimmed with sleepless red. The badge on his chest flashed briefly, but it was the weapon in his hands that froze Margaret's blood. A tranquilizer rifle, already cocked, the barrel gleaming like a blade. He moved with soldier's precision, careful, practiced, but brittle. His jaw twitched. Sweat gathered along his temple despite the October chill. He carried himself like a man whose bones remembered combat, and whose ghosts never let him rest. Now he raised the rifle. "Step away from the animals!" His voice cracked against the trees, sharp with command, frayed with panic. Lila flinched, curling smaller, burying her face in Buddy's fur. Duchess stepped instantly between her and the rifle, her body eclipsing the child. Ranger limped forward to cover Margaret's side, and the younger males expanded outward, disciplined arcs of fur and muscle. Their stance was unmistakable. Not predators circling prey, but soldiers shielding civilians. Margaret felt her knees weaken. They're protecting her. From him. Marcus's eyes flicked over the formation, jaw tightening. Recognition flickered, ugly and undeniable. "These animals are feral," he barked, voice climbing to cover its own quiver. "They're killers. You need to move, now." Margaret lifted her hand, forcing calm into her voice. "Marcus, look at them. Do they look feral to you?" For a heartbeat, she glimpsed something raw in his gaze. The boy he must have been, carrying burdens too heavy for youth. Then his mask snapped back, harder. "You don't understand, Mrs. Hayes," he snapped. "I've seen packs like this. They don't think. They don't reason. They tear apart anything in their path." But the pack didn't move. Duchess's tail swept low, slow, steady. Not the whip of aggression, but the signal of control. Their discipline was too precise, their silence too measured. Margaret knew the truth before she spoke it. "That's not hunting," she said, her voice steady as stone. "That's formation." Marcus's grip faltered. His eyes darted across them, unease leaking through his mask. Margaret stepped forward, the cane steadying her frame, but not her tone. "They're not attacking. They're closing ranks. They're shielding the girl from you." Lila's voice wove into the silence, thin but certain. "They're like knights, Miss Margaret. They won't let him hurt us." Duchess turned her head briefly toward the girl, amber eyes softening, as if confirming the child's words. Marcus's jaw locked. "No," he growled, though the word trembled. "You don't know what they're capable of." "Yes, I do," Margaret countered, her voice cracking into the cadence of command she had once used in training kennels. "I trained dogs like these for 30 years. I watched them drag soldiers from ambushes. I saw them shield children in villages. And there's one thing they never do, Marcus. Not ever." Her voice rang through the trees, strong enough to startle even the birds in the canopy. "They never mistake an ally for an enemy unless the ally betrayed them first." The words detonated in the clearing. Marcus's shoulders jerked, his breath stuttered. Sweat slid down his face, as if the truth itself were burning through his skin. The rifle wavered, his knuckles whitening as though only sheer force kept him holding it upright. Lila peeked out from behind Duchess, her voice fragile but piercing. "Miss Margaret, why don't they trust him?" Margaret swallowed hard, her answer caught between her throat and her heart. The truth was forming, sharp as glass, but Marcus spoke first. "Don't," he snapped, panic scraping his tone raw. "Don't start this. You have no idea what these animals are." "They're capable of loyalty," Margaret shot back. "And loyalty doesn't break without cause." Duchess stepped forward again, closing the distance until the barrel nearly brushed her scarred chest. She didn't snarl, didn't flinch. Her stance was steady as an oak. The growl that rolled from her chest was low, controlled, final. One more wrong move, and the forest would pass judgment. Marcus's lips moved, whispering fragments. Margaret caught pieces. Barking. Ambush. Family. His eyes flicked wildly, not to the humans, but to the scars lining Duchess's muzzle, to the burns across Angel's flank, to the limp in Ranger's gait. His face collapsed into a mask of guilt and horror. The rifle trembled. And then Lila spoke, her voice breaking like a child's prayer, but carrying the weight of a verdict. "They're not scared of us," she whispered, her cheek pressed to Buddy's fur. "They're scared for us." The words struck harder than any bullet. Marcus's breath hitched. His shoulders sagged. The rifle dipped an inch, then another. For a single unguarded heartbeat, he looked less like a ranger with authority and more like a man on trial. And the jury, staring back at him, glowed amber in the failing light. Margaret steadied herself, every inch of her body trembling, but her voice firm. "Put the rifle down, Marcus. If you fire that weapon, it won't be the dogs that are condemned. It'll be you. Because I'll tell anyone who listens to what I saw here tonight. And what I saw is 5 trained veterans choosing a child over a ranger." The air thickened with the weight of her declaration. Marcus's jaw clenched, his chest heaving. Duchess didn't move, didn't blink, her scarred face inches from the barrel, the full might of her pack coiled behind her. The child nestled in their circle, the old widow standing firm before them, and one broken man holding a weapon he no longer seemed certain he had the right to use. The seeds were sown. Why would battle-scarred, disciplined shepherds, soldiers in fur, see a uniformed ranger as the enemy? And why did Marcus Webb's haunted eyes look like they already knew the answer? The forest pressed inward, thick with tension between man, child, and dogs. Marcus Webb gripped the tranquilizer rifle, arms sagging under a weight heavier than steel. Sweat slid down his temples as his eyes darted across the scarred shepherds. Each mark in their fur reflected something he didn't want to remember. Duchess rumbled low, not a threat, but a warning. The pack echoed her, a chorus that made Margaret Hayes's skin prickle, and Marcus broke. "Not again," he muttered, voice strangled. "Not again. I won't let it happen again." Margaret's gaze sharpened. That wasn't a ranger managing wildlife. It was a soldier confessing to ghosts. She had heard men whisper like that into their dog's fur after losing brothers in the field. "Not again," Marcus said louder, his rifle jerking as though his body didn't know where to aim. His hands shook violently when the Duchess barked once, sharp and commanding. He flinched. He reacts like a guilty man hearing judgment, Margaret thought. His muttering quickened. "Orders, ambush, civilians, barking. I thought it was them." He cut himself short, but the words hung in the night air. Margaret pieced the fragments together. Soldiers, civilians, blood. Something in these dogs had ripped open his scabbed-over past. From behind Duchess, little Lila asked softly, "What's he talking about?" Margaret didn't answer. She couldn't. The scarred female shifted on the rise, amber eyes locked on Marcus. The grizzled male twitched his lips, teeth barely bared. Duchess held steady, her stare unbroken. Marcus whispered, "They shouldn't be here. I buried that unit." His voice cracked. "I buried them." A chill knifed through Margaret. Buried that unit. The pack stiffened. Duchess barked again, sharp, deliberate. Marcus flinched as if back in a desert night drenched with fire. His rifle trembled. His mind was unraveling. Lila's small voice pierced the silence. "The dogs aren't scared of you. They're scared for us." "Why?" "Unless they knew something." Her innocence cut sharper than accusation. Marcus's face twisted. "Quiet," he barked at the child. Duchess surged forward, hackles rising, growl vibrating the clearing. "Stand down, Marcus Webb." Margaret's voice cracked like a whip. Her shoulders squared, every word laced with trainer's authority. "You're not here. You're back there. And those dogs, they know it. They see the battlefield living inside you." Marcus's mouth opened, shut, opened again. His eyes flicked to Duchess's scar, the burns, the limp. His voice broke. "They can't be here. I buried them." The fracture point came. Marcus muttered, "Not again," and the rifle twitched upward. Time bent. Duchess stood her ground, scarred face steady, waiting. Margaret's heart lurched. He was going to shoot her. Her body moved before thought. "No!" she cried, hurling herself forward. Her shoulder struck the barrel as his finger squeezed. The hiss of compressed air split the night. A sting tore her chest. Heat spread beneath her skin. Knees buckled. Vision swam. The tranquilizer meant for a 90-pound dog dragged her under. "Miss Margaret!" Lila screamed. The rifle clattered as Marcus staggered back. "No, I didn't." His words shattered. Margaret collapsed, palms clawing dirt, breath shallow. The world blurred into amber and green. Through haze, She saw the Duchess lower beside her, muzzle pressing gently to her arm. Then the pack erupted, not in frenzy, but unity. The grizzled male planted himself over her, eyes scanning. The younger pair flanked outward, snarling sharp warnings. The scarred female circled with surgical precision. And the Duchess stood sentinel before Marcus, her growl an avalanche deep in her chest. Marcus froze, rifle dangling. His voice came hoarse. "I didn't mean, she shouldn't have..." But excuses dissolved under 5 pairs of burning eyes. Lila dropped beside Margaret, tears streaking. The pup squirmed in her arms. She pressed her hands desperately to the old woman's chest. "Please, don't leave me." Margaret's eyes fluttered. Her voice was slurred but steady. "I had to." The drug pulled her down. Lila sobbed harder. Margaret's hand twitched, brushing the child's. "The dogs. They'll keep you safe. Always." Her hand fell still. The pack's growl deepened, a chorus of loyalty. Duchess moved with purpose, nosing leaves aside until Margaret's phone appeared. She carried it delicately, set it against Margaret's limp hand, then pressed a paw. The screen lit. She pressed again. Emergency call. 911, what is your emergency? Crackled a voice. Duchess nudged Lila. Margaret croaked faintly. "Tell them," before sinking back. Lila understood. Her small voice trembled but clear. "This is Lila Bennett. We're in the forest near Miss Margaret's house. My grandma, she's hurt bad. A man shot her with a dart. Please hurry." "Stay calm," the dispatcher replied. "Help is on the way." Relief broke through Lila's sobs. She hugged the Duchess's neck. "You saved us." The pack shifted again, forming a living wall. The grizzled male shielded Margaret's body. The scarred female scanned the woods. The young ones bracketed Lila. Duchess stood commander. Marcus whispered, horrified. "Impossible. They're not supposed to do that. They're animals." Margaret's eyes opened one last time. Her hoarse voice cut through the clearing. "Not animals. Soldiers." Her eyes slid shut again. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. The Duchess lifted her head high, then barked once, sharp and commanding. The pack answered in unison. A signal, not a howl. A message. "We've done our part. Come quickly." Marcus's haunted gaze flicked between child, woman, and disciplined unit. His weapon lay forgotten in the dirt. "They weren't supposed to survive," he whispered, softer now, as if realizing it himself. But the Duchess pressed against Margaret and Lila, flanks curved protectively around them. The vow was clear. Margaret might fall, Lila might weep, but the pack would not yield. As the sirens grew louder, Margaret exhaled a trembling breath. "They know," she whispered. "They've always known." Lila clutched her hand tighter, tears soaking her skin. "Don't leave me. The dogs are helping. You have to stay." Margaret's lips barely curved into a smile. "If they chose you, you'll never be alone." The circle of loyalty tightened once more. 5 veterans in fur, a child with tears on her cheeks, and an old woman on the brink, bound by a truth even Marcus Webb could not deny. This was no accident. This was allegiance. And the Duchess had proved it with the press of a paw. The sirens came first. Faint at the edges of Redwood Hollow, then louder, threading through the trees like both promise and warning. To Lila, crouched on the forest floor with Margaret's limp hand clutched in her own, the sound was salvation and fear. Help was coming. But would strangers see the truth before making Marcus's mistake? The pup whimpered in her arms. Duchess pressed closer, her scarred body curving protectively around the child and elder. The rest of the pack held formation, the grizzled veteran guarding Margaret, the scarred females circling, the younger males flanking outward. Not animals in panic, but soldiers bracing for reinforcements. Marcus Webb swayed, hollow-eyed, muttering to himself. "They'll see. They'll know what I know. You'll see what these monsters really are." Headlights cut through the trees. Tires crunched roots. Sirens snapped off. Doors slammed. "Police! Show me your hands!" The voice was sharp, female, commanding. Officer Elena Martinez stepped into the clearing, weapon drawn, but angled down. Behind her, red and white ambulance lights pulsed against the timberline. In one sweep, she saw it all. A child clutching a puppy. An elderly woman is pale on the ground. A ranger, trembling, empty-handed. And 5 German shepherds, not attacking, but guarding. Her breath caught. Jesus Christ! The Alpha, scarred, imposing, eyes burning with intelligence, stood between Lila and Marcus. The others mirrored her stance. Not predators, protectors. Marcus lunged toward Eleanor, voice cracking. "They're dangerous. Look what they did." He pointed at Margaret's prone body. But Eleanor's eyes saw more. The tranquilizer dart in the dirt, the puncture mark on Margaret's chest, the dog's muzzles clean of blood. Defense, not assault. Her voice was steady. "Step back, Marcus. Now!" He blinked. "You don't understand. They'll tear her apart if we don't put them down." "Funny," Elena shot back. "From where I stand, they're the only thing keeping her safe from you." The words hit him like a blow. His face drained of color. Behind her, paramedics rushed with a stretcher, but froze at the pack's synchronized growl. Duchess bared teeth in precise warning. "Easy," Eleanor calmed. "They're not your enemy." Lila lifted her tear-streaked face. "They're protecting us. Please don't hurt them." Her plea softened the air. Elena holstered her weapon. She met Duchess's amber eyes, and for a heartbeat, recognition passed between them. The Alpha dipped her head. Acknowledgement. Elena crouched, voice gentle. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" "Lila Bennett. That's my grandma, Margaret. She saved the dog. And then he..." She pointed at Marcus, her voice breaking. "He tried to shoot Duchess." Miss Margaret jumped in front. "Please, help her." Marcus snapped, desperate. "She's just a kid. They've tricked her." "Enough," Eleanor barked. Paramedics edged forward. Duchess studied them, then stepped aside. The circle opened just enough. Margaret was lifted gently onto the stretcher. Lila clung to her hand until the last moment, whispering, "Don't let go." As sirens wailed again, Elena's eyes returned to Marcus. His uniform looked less like authority, and more like costume over a trembling body. "Marcus," she said evenly, "explain what just happened." He shook his head violently. "You don't understand. They're ghosts. I buried them. I buried all of them." Lila whispered, "What does he mean?" Marcus's voice cracked. "Afghanistan. The barking at night. The shapes in the dark. I thought it was an ambush. Civilians weren't supposed to be there. I didn't know until it was too late." The pack straightened. Duchess released a sharp bark. The others echoed in perfect rhythm, then lifted muzzles skyward. The howl that rose wasn't wild, but ordered, layered, structured. Not predators, witnesses. Marcus staggered. "Shut up." "You weren't there. You didn't see." But still they howled. Judgment carried on the wind. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head. Words spilled like confession. A father, a mother, 2 children, and their shepherd, loyal to the end. He tried to shield them. I thought it was the enemy. I fired. Lila hugged the pup tighter, her small voice trembling. "You hurt people." Marcus's face twisted, shame breaking through rage. Elena stepped forward, voice sharp. "And then what? You covered it up? Blame the dogs?" His silence was answer enough. The howl faded. Duchess lowered her head, eyes fixed on him. Not hatred, recognition. She remembered. They all did. "They remember," Elena whispered. Marcus shook, voice hoarse. No survivors, no witnesses. They were supposed to be gone, but they're here. They'll ruin everything. Lila's reply cut like a blade. "No, Mr. Ranger. They're here because you ruined it." For the first time, Marcus had no words. Then, from the stretcher being wheeled to the ambulance, came a faint rasp. "Wait." Margaret Hayes stirred, silver hair damp, skin pale. She forced her eyes open, gesturing weakly toward the pack. "Not wild," she whispered. "Veterans. They remember." The clearing froze. Margaret's gaze locked on Elena. Her voice was frail but fierce. "Look at them. Spacing, discipline, scars. I trained dogs like these. They don't forget. Not missions, not handlers, not betrayals." Duchess stepped forward, lowering her muzzle to brush Margaret's trembling hand. The gesture was reverent. Margaret's fingers twitched against her fur. They remember every command, every scream. They were there that night. They saw what Marcus did. Elena turned sharply to Marcus. His face was pale, his lips soundless. "No, they don't." But the grizzled male growled low, steady, the sound of a soldier identifying his enemy. Margaret's strength ebbed, but she forced one last truth. Dogs don't lie. They only remember. And these are witnesses of war. Lila pressed her cheek to Margaret's hand, whispering through tears. "You're right. They've been trying to tell us all along." Elena straightened, her voice steel. She keyed her radio. "Dispatch, this is Martinez. Confirming. The animals on scene are not feral. They are trained canine veterans. Multiple witnesses confirm, and physical evidence supports. Subject, Marcus Webb, is implicated in possible civilian deaths. Request immediate military liaison. Possible war crime cover-up." Marcus let out a strangled cry. "I was following orders. It was confusion. The night—" But every amber eye pinned him with unflinching certainty. The forest itself seemed to lean heavier, pressing his crimes into the open. Margaret slumped back, eyes fluttering. But her words remained, echoing in the clearing. Not wild. Veterans. They remember. Eleanor felt the truth settle like stone. These weren't just dogs. They were survivors, witnesses, soldiers carrying memories in their scars. And their testimony was about to change everything. The ambulance tore down the winding road from Redwood Hollow, its siren wailing like a desperate prayer. Inside, Margaret Hayes lay strapped to a stretcher. oxygen mask hissing with each labored breath. Electrodes clung to her frail chest, the monitor's steady beeps doing more work than her own heart. Lila sat wedged between her mother and the paramedic, fingers knotted around Margaret's hand. "Don't leave me, Grandma," she whispered, voice breaking. Sarah Bennett, pale and tight-jawed, gripped her daughter with one hand and Margaret's with the other. Fear choked her too much for tears. She stared at each faint rise of Margaret's chest, counting them like beads on a rosary. "She's fighting," the paramedic murmured, adjusting the IV line, though doubt clung to his tone. Outside, 5 shadows followed. The pack had refused to stay behind. They ran in formation behind Officer Martinez's cruiser, Duchess at the lead, the others at her flanks. Even Buddy, the pup with the bandaged leg, rode in the passenger seat, whimpering with every turn of the siren. By the time the ambulance screeched into the hospital bay, doctors and nurses were waiting. They swarmed Margaret, barking clipped commands. 78, female, tranquilizer overdose, unstable vitals. ICU, prep for intubation if needed. Lila and Sarah stumbled out, blinded by harsh lights, watching helplessly as Margaret disappeared behind swinging doors. The squeal of gurney wheels echoed, then vanished. Sarah knelt, gripping her daughter's shoulders. "She's strong. We have to believe she'll make it." Lila's lips trembled. "She's all we have." The words pierced Sarah's chest. She pulled her daughter close, tears finally breaking free. A nurse led them to the ICU waiting room, beige walls and buzzing fluorescents pressing in. Plastic chairs sagged under the weight of sleepless vigils. Sarah collapsed into one, Lila curled in her lap, both clinging to each other like castaways. Outside, the pack took position. Duchess sat facing the ICU doors, unmoving as stone. Ranger, the grizzled veteran, lifted his scarred muzzle to scent the air. Scout and Bear flanked the sides, ears swiveling at every step. Angel, the scarred female, patrolled in slow, steady arcs. Patients and families stopped to stare. 5 battle-marked shepherds in a perfect semicircle beneath the hospital lights, amber eyes burning with vigilance. A security guard approached, radio half lifted, but when Duchess met his gaze, he froze. Later, he would tell his colleagues, those weren't strays, they were soldiers on guard. Inside, time crawled. The ICU doors swung open and shut, but never for them. Sarah kept her eyes fixed, dread and hope wrestling in her chest. Lila whispered into her mother's shirt, "They won't leave her. They'll stay until she wakes up." Sarah kissed her hair. "And so will we." Through the glass, the dogs didn't move. The night wind whipped, but their vigil held. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Sarah dozed, chin on her daughter's hair, but Lila stayed awake, whispering into the silence, "Grandma Dorothy, please don't give up. The dogs need you. I need you." A faint whine drifted through the glass. Duchess's voice, mournful, steady, as if echoing the child's prayer. For Sarah and Lila, the waiting room became a chapel. Faith measured not in hymns, but in steady beeps and 5 loyal silhouettes. At last a nurse led them down the corridor. Room 14. Margaret lay pale against white sheets, her silver hair damp, her face masked by oxygen. Machines hummed like indifferent guardians. "Grandma," Lila whispered. Sarah stroked her hair. "Talk to her, sweetheart. They say people can hear." Lila crept to the bedside, her small hand on Margaret's. Cool, limp, fragile. "Hi, Grandma. It's me. The doctors are helping you. And the dogs are helping too. They're outside, waiting." She described them one by one. "Duchess, the scarred leader who pressed her head on Lila's shoulder when she cried. Ranger, sitting guard without moving. Scout, bear, angel, watching everything. It's like they know you're their person too. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. You told me dogs feel love. I think you're right, because they love you, Grandma. And I love you. Please don't go yet. I still need you. The heart monitor beeped. Margaret's finger twitched. Lila gasped. Mama! She moved! Sarah rushed forward, eyes wide. The heart rate climbed a few beats. Keep talking. Lila leaned closer, her tears dripping on Margaret's hand. Buddy's okay, Grandma. I wrapped his leg, the vet's helping him. He'll run again because you taught me how. The finger twitched again, stronger. The nurse hurried in, glancing at the monitor. Positive sign. Don't stop. Lila whispered fiercely. You told me family isn't just who you're born to. It's who chooses to love you. You chose me, and I'm choosing you. So don't let go. A tear slipped from Margaret's closed eye. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, sobbing openly now. The nurse whispered, awed. She's hearing her. She's fighting. Outside, faint through the glass, a harmony rose, not a full howl, but a chorus of low voices. The pack's prayer. Lila pressed her forehead to Margaret's hand. Hear that, Grandma? They're calling for you. Don't leave them waiting. Hope flickered in the sterile room, fragile but alive. Outside, mist clung to the lot. Duchess and her pack held formation beneath the lamps, statues carved from flesh and loyalty. Nurses paused on smoke breaks. Guards who once bristled now kept respectful distance. Something in those amber eyes made human authority falter. Then Duchess lifted her head. Her breath steamed as she loosed a single note, low, mournful, ancient. Not the frantic cry of wolves. Something deeper. It rolled across the lot, echoing off walls and glass. One by one, the others joined. Rangers rumble, angels high keen, scout and bear, weaving strength. A chorus. Not chaos, but harmony. Testimony. Inside, machines beeped, but the dog's song threaded into the rhythm. Families in waiting rooms froze, tears slipping unbidden. Nurses' trays rattled as the sound pierced their chests. By midnight, townsfolk gathered outside, coats pulled tight. None spoke. To interrupt would have felt sacrilegious. Mrs. Patterson, who had lived in Redwood Hollow 40 years, whispered through her rosary. I've heard soldiers cry like that, but never dogs. Lord help me, they're crying for her. The song swelled, unbearable in beauty. The Duchess's voice led, unwavering, refusing to surrender her fallen. The others anchored her, walling out the night. Tears streamed freely. A doctor pressed his palms together. A police officer removed his cap, bowing his head in salute. When the chorus faded, silence hung heavy, saturated with meaning. The pack lowered their heads, bodies still, but the echo lingered. Lila pressed her hand to the glass. They're telling Grandma not to give up. They're keeping her safe until she wakes up. Sarah held her close, her own tears flowing. She had never believed in omens, but watching those scarred dogs sing, something shifted. It wasn't just hope anymore. It was faith. That night, Redwood Hollow witnessed something it would never forget. 5 German shepherds, veterans of forgotten wars, howling not for themselves, but for the woman who had chosen them as family. Their song was no farewell. It was a vow. And in that vow, loyalty transcended species, time, even death itself. The ICU smelled of antiseptic and faint metal, the air chilled by machines that hummed with relentless precision. For 3 days, Margaret Hayes had lain suspended between breaths, her chest rising only because the tubes demanded it. Sarah sat slumped in the bedside chair, eyes fixed on the flicker of green lines, measuring time in heartbeats. Lila was curled across her lap, clutching a stuffed puppy the nurses had given her. At night, she whispered that it wasn't Buddy. Sarah stroked her hair, whispering silent prayers to the space between life and death. Outside the ICU window, 5 shadows remained faithful. Rain had slicked their coats, but Duchess and her pack never moved. Nurses on break whispered they had never seen animals so still. It was as if the hospital had gained an honor guard. By mid-morning, something changed. The monitor hiccuped, spiked, then steadied again. Sarah leaned forward, panic gripping her. Then came a sound, faint but real, a breath, Margaret's own. Her eyelids fluttered open, clouded blue eyes fixed on the room. Sarah gasped, shaking her daughter. "Wake up, sweetheart. She's waking." Lila sat up so fast the toy hit the floor. "Grandma?" Margaret's lips moved beneath the mask. The nurse adjusted it, and the words came, hoarse but clear. "Are the dogs safe?" Tears sprang instantly. Lila sobbed with relief. "They're outside. Duchess, Ranger, all of them. They haven't left you." Margaret's eyes softened. "Good. Good girls. Good boys." Sarah bent close, forehead almost touching hers. "You scared us. You nearly left us." Margaret's fingers curled weakly around hers. "Not yet." The nurse checked her monitors, shaking her head. "Remarkable. For her age, for the dose she took. She's got the heart of a soldier." Sarah smiled through tears. "No, the heart of a trainer and a grandmother." Lila pressed Margaret's hand to her cheek. "I told you the dogs needed you. I told you we did too. You heard me, didn't you?" "Always hear you, child," Margaret whispered, "even in the dark." From outside came the sound of howls. Duchess had seen movement long before the monitors. Her voice rose, strong and jubilant. The others joined, their chorus filling the parking lot, echoing into the ICU. Margaret smiled faintly. "Hear them? They're saying welcome back." For the first time in days, the ICU no longer felt like a place of endings. It felt like a beginning. Later, in the hospital cafeteria, Officer Elena Martinez slid into the booth across from Sarah. The air smelled of burnt coffee. Lila dozed with her chin on the table, eyes heavy from nights of fear. Martinez placed a thick folder on the table. Her badge glinted under the light. "I need to tell you something about those dogs." Sarah stiffened. "They saved us. You're not going to call them dangerous, are you?" "No," Martinez said quietly. "Not to you, but they are extraordinary." She opened the folder. Black and white photographs. Duchess standing in desert sand. Ranger leaping beside a soldier. Angel pressed to a child's backpack in a search drill. 6 months ago, Martinez explained, a transport convoy carried 5 retired canines to a rehab facility in Washington. Their handler had been killed overseas. The dogs were officially discharged. Sarah whispered, "Discharged, like soldiers." "They were soldiers," Martinez said. "Explosives detection, civilian protection. They saved lives, but they came back scarred, physically, emotionally. The plan was to rehome them, but the convoy never arrived. Empty truck, unconscious driver. The dogs vanished." Lila stirred, her voice small. "They escaped?" Martinez softened. "Yes. Or maybe someone let them go. We never knew. Until now. Duchess, Ranger, Angel, Scout, Bear. These aren't strays. They're that unit, surviving, watching, protecting." Sarah's breath caught. "That's why they moved like soldiers." Martinez nodded. "And here's what matters. They don't trust humans easily anymore. They've seen betrayal. But somehow, they trust you. They chose you." Lila sat up straighter. "Chose us?" "Dogs like these don't operate by accident," Martinez said. "When they circled you in the woods, when Duchess laid her head in your lap, that wasn't instinct. That was allegiance. In their minds, you became their mission." Sarah's voice trembled. "She saved their pup, and in return, they're saving her," Martinez finished. Sarah's eyes blurred as she studied the photographs. Heroes once, discarded when their war ended. She pictured Lila cradling Buddy in the woods. "Families aren't just blood," she whispered. "Grandma was right." Lila reached across the table, her small hand covering Sarah's. "We can't leave them. They don't have anyone else. They chose us." Martinez leaned in, her voice firm. "The military will want answers. Some will want them reclaimed. But I'll file my report to keep them with you. Call it therapy. Call it protective custody. Whatever works. But truth is, those dogs already decided where they belong." Sarah pulled her daughter close, tears falling. Lila whispered fiercely, "We're their family now." At that moment, a shadow filled the doorway. Duchess. She had slipped past the guards, silent as a ghost. Her amber eyes locked onto Lila's. Slowly, the alpha padded across the floor. She stopped at their table, then lowered her scarred muzzle into the girl's lap. Lila buried her hands in the thick fur, sobbing. "She knows," Lila whispered. "She knows we said yes." And in that cafeteria, with burnt coffee and humming lights, a pact was sealed. Not with documents, but with touch, with trust, with allegiance. Late afternoon light spilled across the hospital floor in golden stripes. Sarah sat outside the ICU, arms wrapped around Lila. Margaret was stable, doctors said. Recovery would take time. For now, they waited. Through the glass, the pack waited too. Martinez had fought to let them inside the lobby. Too many had witnessed their vigil in the parking lot. No one dared call them strays now. They lay in formation, eyes tracking every passerby. Families slowed. Nurses whispered. The dogs looked less like pets than living monuments. "Mama," Lila whispered. "They're not leaving, are they?" Sarah pressed a kiss to her hair. "No, they're not leaving." As if answering, Duchess rose. She moved with quiet authority, pressing against the door until a nurse yielded. The alpha padded across the tile, nails clicking softly. Sarah tensed, instinct tightening her arms around her child, but she didn't pull her away. Something in the dog's bearing told her this moment was sacred. Duchess stopped in front of them, amber eyes steady. Then she lowered herself, resting her head gently across Lila's lap. The girl froze, then slid her hands into the scarred fur. Her tears spilled freely. She remembers. She knows I helped Buddy. Sarah's throat tightened. Nurses slowed. A doctor stopped mid-chart. Martinez stood at the desk, arms folded, eyes glistening. "You saved my pup," Lila whispered into the fur. "Now you're saving me." Sarah thought of the years she had carried grief like stone, the nights she had prayed for strength. And here it was. Salvation in the form of 5 scarred dogs who had no reason to trust again. She lowered her voice, almost to herself. "They've adopted us." Martinez stepped closer, her voice thick. "No, they've claimed you. And once dogs like these make that choice, nothing in the world can undo it." Ranger limped forward, scars etched across his muzzle, standing beside Duchess. Angel pressed against Sarah's knee. Scout and Bear flanked behind, completing the circle. No suspicion this time. Belonging. Lila looked up at her mother, cheeks wet, smile trembling. "See, Mama? Families aren't just people. Sometimes families find you." Sarah laid her hand on Duchess's head, her daughter's hand beneath it. In that layered touch, mother, child, and warrior dog, something broke open. They were no longer 3 lost souls. They were a family. And as Duchess pressed deeper into Lila's lap, eyes closing with trust, Sarah finally believed it. The courthouse in Redwood Hollow was modest brick, but on the morning of Marcus Webb's trial, it loomed like a cathedral of reckoning. Reporters crowded the steps. Townsfolk whispered in anxious clusters. Redwood Hollow had lived in silence for too long. Today, silence would end. Inside, benches groaned under the weight of neighbors, veterans, parents, strangers. At the front, the judge's bench rose like a sentinel. Sarah sat in the second row, Lila pressed tight beside her. Margaret leaned on a carved cane, still pale but resolute. And then the gasps came. The pack had been granted special permission to attend. Duchess led them down the aisle, scars catching the light like medals, followed by Ranger, Angel, Scout, and Bear. They settled in formation with military precision, forming a living wall beside their family. No leashes, no commands. Their presence stilled the room. Then Marcus Webb entered, shackled, thinner, jaw tight with a soldier's defiance. His eyes flicked toward the pack, and his mask faltered. Fear trembled in his jaw. The prosecutor rose. "This case is about betrayal, of duty, of trust, of life itself. Years ago, a family disappeared while camping in the Cascades. Records claimed an animal attack. The truth is darker. Marcus Webb, in paranoia, mistook them for threats. He killed them and used his position to cover it." She gestured to the dogs. These animals were there. Military veterans trained to protect civilians. They witnessed the crime, and when history threatened to repeat itself, when Webb raised his weapon at a child in those same woods, they acted with discipline, with loyalty, with purpose. The defense objected, overruled. Evidence followed. Brittle reports, names of the lost family, the children, their shepherd. The collar was placed on the table. Lila buried her face in Sarah's sleeve. Then came the recording. Marcus's voice from that night. Afghanistan. The barking. The family in the woods. His unraveling confession. The jury sat in silence. When it ended, Duchess rose. She fixed her amber eyes on Webb and released a low rumble. Ranger joined, his scarred muzzle trembling. One by one, the pack added their voices, not chaos, a unified vibration. Testimony. The judge did not silence them. He nodded. Let the record show. These animals bear witness. It was the final crack. Webb broke. You don't understand, he shouted. They wouldn't stop barking. They wouldn't stop reminding me. I had to silence them. They're not heroes, they're ghosts. They've been haunting me for years. The jury recoiled. His own words condemned him. Margaret rose slowly, cane steady, voice carrying clear. They are not ghosts, Marcus. They are veterans, survivors, and they remember. The pack lowered into perfect obedience beside Lila. Soldiers at rest. The trial stretched on. Witnesses, documents. But nothing struck deeper than that moment. Dogs as veterans. A child between them. A man unraveling. When the gavel fell, Marcus Webb was guilty on all counts. Sarah pressed her forehead to Lila's. It's over, sweetheart. He can't hurt anyone anymore. Duchess leaned into them, warm and steady. In that courtroom, loyalty had outlasted fear. Memory had outlasted silence. News spread through Redwood Hollow like fire. By evening, everyone knew. Marcus Webb was guilty, and the dogs had been more than animals. They had been witnesses, guardians, saviors. Margaret's farmhouse, once quiet, became the beating heart of the town. Its white siding was chipped, the porch sagging, but now footsteps filled it. Voices, laughter, care. Mrs. Patterson arrived first, arms full of casseroles. For you and the little one, she told Sarah. The Henderson boys came next with lumber to patch the roof. Cars lined the gravel, releasing families with blankets, tools, food. Some came from duty, others curiosity. Most came because they had been moved, by the child shielded in the woods, by the haunting howl in the hospital lot, by loyalty too deep to ignore. On the porch, Duchess stood sentinel, regal. Ranger sat beside her, scars like carved history. Scout and Bear flanked the yard, alert. Angel wandered among children, tolerating small hands against her torn ear. Lila darted between them, laughter spilling free for the first time in months. They like apple slices, she called, holding a bowl. Duchess takes them soft, but Bear crunches loud. The children squealed at the sound. Sarah watched, relief aching in her chest. The girl who once carried grief now carried joy. Around them, neighbors hammered shutters and painted railings. For the first time in years, Sarah felt belonging. Margaret, cane in hand, stood at the porch rail, tears running down her face. She had trained men and dogs for war, buried her husband, lived long enough to expect she'd die alone. Now her porch rang with laughter. Her life had been rewritten. Officer Martinez arrived near dusk, badge at her belt, but jacket plain. She looked around. You've got an army out here. Margaret chuckled. An army of casseroles and hammers. I'll take it. Martinez's gaze softened. Those dogs gave this town something it didn't know it needed. A story of survival, of loyalty. That kind of story changes people. Sarah stepped up beside them, brushing hair from her face. It changed us too. As night fell, lanterns strung across the yard. Someone played fiddle, children danced barefoot. The dogs watched calmly, guardians at peace. At one point, Mrs. Patterson leaned on Sarah. These dogs aren't just yours now. They're ours too. This town will never forget them. Sarah swallowed tears. She had once measured life in loss. Now she saw it measured in hands reaching when you're falling. The moment came when Duchess stepped down from the porch, weaving through the crowd. She returned to Lila, resting her scarred head in the child's lap. A hush fell. "She's claiming her," Margaret whispered. "That girl saved her pup. In return, Duchess has given us her loyalty. From now on, we are under their protection." Applause swelled, scattering into cheers. Lila hugged the Duchess fiercely. "And we'll protect them too, because families take care of each other." The farmhouse became more than shelter. It became a sanctuary. Winter came early, laying frost across fields and hemming the forest in silver. For the first time in years, the season did not feel like a sentence. Inside the farmhouse, the wood stove crackled, warmth filling the rooms. Sarah studied at the kitchen table, veterinary textbooks spread before her. She had enrolled in classes, chasing a dream she'd thought lost. Doubt still whispered, too old, too tired. But when Duchess lay at her feet, scarred muzzle across her shoes, Sarah felt the reminder. This was why. Lila returned to school with a confidence that startled her teachers. Once quiet, hunched, she now walked with a spark in her step. At the playground fence, the pack waited each morning. At first, children were frightened, but soon they edged closer. One boy offered Scout his sandwich, laughing at the gentle acceptance. By spring, the scarred shepherds had become the school's silent mascots. Margaret healed more slowly, but steadily. She worked her garden again, planting winter greens. Ranger limped at her side. Angel sprawled near the porch. Bear carried firewood in his jaws. She laughed often now, a sound she had thought gone forever. One snowy evening, Sarah paused at the porch. Through the window, she saw Margaret teaching Lila to braid bread, flour, dusting their faces. Bear and Scout stood watch near the door. Duchess curled by the fire with Buddy, the once injured pup now strong. Sarah's chest ached with gentleness. Once she had measured life in losses. Now she measured it in moments. Voices in the kitchen, a tail thumping the floor, light spilling onto snow. Later, they sat together in the living room. Margaret in her chair, Lila sprawled on the rug with Buddy, Sarah on the sofa with her books. The pack formed a loose semicircle surrounding them. Margaret's eyes glowed with thought. "I used to think healing came with time. But time alone doesn't heal. It's what you fill it with that matters." Sarah listened. "I filled mine with bitterness for too long," Margaret said. "But now, I see laughter. I see loyalty. That's what's knitting me back together." Lila looked up. "Does that mean we're healing too?" Margaret smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. All of us. Even them." Duchess lifted her head as if to agree. Sarah whispered, "I thought we were broken forever. But somehow this family, this strange, mismatched family, put us back together." Silence filled the room, warm and full. Then Lila spoke, her voice steady. "It's like when a candle lights another candle. The first one doesn't lose anything. The light just gets bigger." Margaret's eyes brimmed. She reached for Sarah's hand, then Lila's, linking them. The dogs shifted closer, pressing into the circle. Outside, the wind rattled the farmhouse walls. Inside, breath and love held steady. The scars remained, on bodies, on hearts. But they no longer felt like wounds. They were reminders, proof of battles survived, soil from which something stronger grows. The spring sun shone warm over Redwood Hollow, spilling gold across the fields and painting Margaret Hayes's farmhouse in soft light. A breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh bread. The yard, once silent, once heavy with grief, now brimmed with laughter. It was Lila Bennett's 8th birthday. Streamers fluttered on the porch rails. Between two old oaks, a banner stretched wide. "Happy birthday, Lila." The letters were uneven, painted by hand, but they radiated love. Tables sagged under pies, fruit bowls, and casseroles neighbors had carried in. Children darted barefoot through the grass, squealing with delight. Parents lingered nearby, sipping lemonade, their eyes often straying to the guardians patrolling the yard. The pack had taken their posts like it was a ceremony. Duchess rested under the oak, scarred muzzle lifted, eyes sweeping the scene. Ranger sat nearby, his limp barely noticeable now, scarred but proud. Angel sprawled in the grass, tolerating little hands weaving wildflowers into her fur. Scout and Bear flanked the perimeter, moving in a quiet rhythm. And Buddy, the puppy Lila had once carried from the barbed wire, was no longer frail. His coat shone. His paws had grown too big for his legs, and his bark rang sharp with joy. He tumbled after the children, tail wagging like a metronome of happiness. Every leap was proof of survival, of the girl who refused to leave him behind. Lila stood at the center of it all, hair braided with ribbons, dress dotted with grass stains. She laughed freely, no shadows in her eyes. Each time Buddy bounded back, she pressed her face into his fur, then sent him racing again. On the porch, Margaret watched from her rocking chair, Kane leaning close, quilt across her knees. Her body had slowed, but her eyes sparkled. She had lived through grief and silence. Yet now, surrounded by children and dogs and neighbors, she felt something she hadn't in years. Joy, untouched by fear. Sarah moved through the crowd, pouring lemonade, passing plates. Her veterinary books sat closed inside. For today, she let herself rest. Her daughter was thriving. Margaret was strong, and the pack lounged as proof that second chances were real. Officer Elena Martinez arrived in plain clothes, hair tied back, gift bag in hand. She joined the laughter, though her gaze lingered on the dogs. She knew, as everyone did now, they weren't just pets. They were veterans, family. When the cake came, 3 layers, 8 candles, the crowd sang. Lila closed her eyes. The flames flickered, then vanished into smoke. She opened her eyes, whispering, "I wished for us to stay together." The words settled over the gathering like a blessing. Later, Margaret told stories. At the children's urging, she spoke of her years training canines, loyalty in deserts, soldiers trusting dogs with their lives, the truths seen in canine eyes. The children sat hushed. Even the dogs stilled, ears flicking as though remembering. At one point, Duchess rose and walked to Lila, lowering her scarred head into the girl's lap. Silence rippled across the yard. Lila stroked the fur, her blue eyes shining. "She's saying thank you," Lila whispered. "For Buddy. For us." Sarah knelt beside her. "And we're saying thank you right back, aren't we?" "Yes," Lila breathed. "Because now we're a family." The pack seemed to agree. Ranger rumbled deep approval. Angel nosed a flower into Lila's hand. Bear rose taller, scanning the yard as though sealing his vow. As dusk fell, lanterns glowed warm in the branches. Children grew drowsy. Parents gathered them close. The dogs relaxed in their usual semicircle, not suspicious now, but content. Margaret leaned back, her eyes sweeping the yard. "This," she said softly, "is what survival looks like. Not just living through the dark days, but finding your way back to the light." The farmhouse, once heavy with silence, had become a sanctuary. Later, when the guests had gone, the family stayed on the porch. The lanterns swayed in the breeze. Crickets sang. The pack had settled. Bear sprawled on the steps. Angel curled near the fence. Scout pacing slow. Ranger resting with his head on his paws. Duchess beneath the oak. Buddy snored in the grass, his head in Lila's lap. Margaret cleared her throat. Her voice was raspy, but steady. "You know," she began, "I thought my story was finished." Sarah looked up. "What do you mean?" Margaret's gaze wandered to the horizon, where a thin band of gold still clung. "After Harold died, I thought my chapter was over. 40 years with a good man, children grown, and then silence. A house too quiet. I told myself I was done, just waiting." Her words trembled. "I thought my best years had been lived, that nothing was left but endurance." Lila tilted her head, voice small but certain. "But you weren't finished, Grandma Dorothy." Margaret smiled gently. "No, sweetheart, I wasn't. Love has a strange way of sneaking back in." She turned to Sarah. "I thought love had to look like it did with Harold. Strong hands, steady presence, children filling the house. But when you and Lila came, when the dogs claimed this place, I learned something. Love wears many faces. Sometimes it's the daughter who isn't yours by blood, but becomes yours by bond. Sometimes it's a child who saves a pup. Sometimes it's a scarred pack that teaches loyalty all over again." Sarah's voice caught. "You saved us, Margaret, more than you know." Margaret shook her head. "No, you saved me. You reminded me that second chances aren't just for the young. They're for all of us." She pressed her hand to her chest. "I thought this heart had nothing left to give, but look at it now." Duchess stirred, her amber eyes glowing in the lantern light. Margaret leaned forward. "Don't ever believe you're too old, too tired, or too broken to begin again. The world has a way of surprising you, if you let it." Lila climbed onto her lap, careful of the quilt. She curled close. "Grandma Dorothy, are we your second chance?" Margaret kissed her hair. "You are my second, third, and fourth chance. You, your mama, and these dogs." Sarah reached for their hands. "And you're ours. We wouldn't have made it without you." For a moment, the three of them sat together in lantern glow, the dogs breathing steady around them. Margaret's rocking chair creaked softly. She lifted her eyes to the stars. "Funny thing about life," she murmured. "It tricks you into thinking endings are permanent. But really, they're just beginnings in disguise." The breeze rustled the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a faint howl rose, carrying not loneliness, but belonging. Margaret smiled. This is the gift of second chances. To love again. To be needed again. To matter again. The yard grew quiet. The lanterns burned low. Stars shimmered overhead like watchful eyes. Lila sat cross-legged. Buddy curled against her. The older dogs formed their circle. Bear on the steps. Scout vigilant. Angel calm by the fence. Ranger scared but proud. Duchess at the center, eyes on the horizon. Then Duchess raised her head. From her throat came a sound. Not warning, not grief. A low note, deliberate, almost like a hymn. The others joined. Ranger's bass rumbled steady as earth. Scout's voice cut sharp and clear. Angel's tone carried sorrow and resilience. Bear's rolled like thunder. Layer by layer, the voices built, not chaos, but harmony. A chorus of memory, of promise. Lila's lips parted. At first, she hummed off-key, then steadier, her child's voice weaving through the canine song. Sarah pressed her hand to her heart. Margaret wept openly in her chair. The harmony rose higher, carrying all they had endured, the woods, the trial, the scars. It carried gratitude too, for survival, for second chances, for love found in unlikely places. The song softened, a benediction to the night. Lila whispered, "They're praying, Mama. They're promising." Sarah pulled her close. "What are they promising?" "That we'll never be alone. That they'll protect us. Always." Margaret's voice, hushed, steady. "She's right. That's what loyalty sounds like. That's what family sounds like." The howls faded until only Duchess remained, her note long and certain. Then she lowered her head and pressed her scarred brow to Lila's chest. The circle of dogs closed around them. Margaret whispered through her tears, "I thought love ended when life did, but love just changes shape. Tonight, it sings." The lanterns flickered, the stars held their vigil. And in the yard of a farmhouse at the edge of Redwood Hollow, a girl, a mother, an old woman, and a scarred pack of shepherds sealed their bond with a vow older than words. It was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of one, written not in ink, but in loyalty, in sacrifice, and in the unbreakable promise of love. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about grand victories, but about simple acts of love. A child's small hands freeing a wounded pup, an old trainer realizing her heart still has room for family, and a pack of scarred German shepherds proving that loyalty never fades. Dogs remind us every day that family isn't just who we're born to, but who we choose, protect, and love unconditionally. If you've ever looked into your own dog's eyes and felt that unspoken bond, you already know what I mean. It's not something that can be measured. It's something you carry in your chest, steady and enduring. I came across a resource recently that helps people deepen that connection with their dogs. Little things you can do to understand them better and make their days brighter. I'll leave the link here, in case it speaks to you the way it did to me. No pressure, just something that felt worth sharing. And if nothing else, maybe tonight you'll give your dog an extra scratch behind the ears, or whisper a thank you for all the ways they've stood by you. Because in the end, that's what love looks like.